In this video, you're going to examine your data from a location you picked to look for evidence of any climate change effects. So here I'm going to look at my data that I got from Portland, Maine in a previous video that covers almost 20 years from January 1st, 2000 until close to the end of 2019. So to do this, we're going to use something called a pivot table so we can summarize this a lot quicker. So to do that, we're going to add a couple columns here. We're going to add a month and a year. And Excel will calculate this automatically for us. So we have a date here, but if we want just the month, we use the command equals month and click on that. And it just returns 1 for January. And then if we want to copy paste that all the way down, hover over the bottom right corner until we get a black plus sign and then double click. There we go. And similarly for year, just do equals year and click on the date. And hover over, double click, and we've got that. So then don't leave this selected, click somewhere else in your table. And now go to Insert, and you'll click a pivot table. And it'll bring up this little dialog, select a table or range. You see it does the marching ants around your selection to tell you it's figured out what you want. And it's going to put it in a new worksheet, so just click OK. So here we have our pivot table. It put it in a sheet called Sheet 1, so I'll just call that Pivot. Now, notice the layout here. It's going to build our table over here out of filters. We're not going to use that one today. Columns, rows, and then the actual values. Like most tables, we can put something in the columns, something in the rows, then we have to have actually something to put in the table cells itself. So I'm going to put years in the rows, and you see what that does. It puts our row labels as 2000 through 2019. Now, I might not use 2019 because that year is not complete, but it puts it in there automatically. In the columns, well, let's do that in a second. First, let's put something in the values. Suppose we put precip in the values. So sum of precip, it's adding up all of the precipitation associated with the year 2000. So if you think about your raw data, anything that has a year 2000, it's going to add up all of the precipitation values. So it's adding up all of this column that is associated with the year 2000. So that is your total rainfall in Portland, Maine in the year 2000 at this specific monitoring station. 40 inches, so about 3 feet and 4.67 inches here. So suppose you don't want precipitation, suppose you want maximum temperature. So just click and drag to remove it, or you can just deselect it with the checkbox up here. And let's put on Tmax in the values. Now it does sum of Tmax. Now does that make sense? Well, no, you wouldn't come into your data and add up the maximum temperatures. That doesn't give you anything. So you don't want a sum of Tmax, you want the average. So go down here to your values, find the drop down, click on value field settings, and then just move that to an average instead. That'll average your maximum temperature. So your average maximum temperature in the year 2000 was 55.385. Okay, that's too many decimal places. So let's just click that. Doesn't quite work. Just select the values, decrease the decimals down to maybe 1. So in the year 2000, your average temperature was 55.4, 56.8 the next year, 56.4, and so on. So if you're looking for evidence of any sort of climate changes, what you could look at is the average temperature going up? And to do that, you could try to make a time plot, but there's one little thing with Excel. Again, I'm not using 2019. If I try to insert a scatter plot here, it's going to give me an error. It says I can't do that inside a pivot table, but blah, 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 or copy the data outside the pivot table. So we can do that. We can just grab this and we can select copy. And we can just go over here. We'll call this paste data. And we can do a paste command. And I'll call this year, I'll call this average Tmax. So then we can make a scatter plot, time plot in this case, of our average temperature. And you can see there is kind of a definite upward trend here, not looking at any dot in particular, but just looking at the overall trend. And here we can go ahead and add a trend line. And to do that, you can check the box, but go next to this arrow here again and select More Options. And then you can display the R-squared value on the chart. And again, we'll talk more about what that is next time, or next module. But for now, just know that R-squared close to 0 means no real trend. R-squared close to 1 means an incredibly strong trend. When I say no real trend versus incredibly strong, we're comparing sort of like the random assortment of the dots to the overall up or down. If the dots just look like a random scatter, it's going to be close to 0. If all the dots were exactly on this line marching up, it would be close to 1. So 0.1854 is not particularly strong, but there's still a lot of randomness in there. The dots are kind of up and down each year. But you can see there is this pretty strong upward trend here. You can just see the dots kind of go up. So one other thing you could look at, not just the average annual, is we go back to our pivot table and click in the pivot table to get this to come up again. Maybe we add month to our columns here. So now this is going to show us our average maximum temperature for January, our average maximum temperature for February, and so on. So maybe you want to say, well, are our Januaries getting warmer? So maybe you just pull, let's say this data right here for our Januaries of 2000 versus 2019. Maybe we copy and paste that as well. And we call this year. And I will say that this is for, what am I doing? So I'll say average Tmax. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and click this up a little bit, insert here. I'm going to put this up here, and I'm just going to call this month 1 for, I'll just call January. Okay, so you might say, are our Januaries getting warmer? So you could copy these, you could do insert, and you could do another time plot like this, and same thing here. I know I should be adding titles and axis labels to all of these, but I'm trying to keep these videos a little shorter while still showing you what I do. So go to trendline again, more options, and display the R-squared value on the chart. And this R-squared you can see is much, much closer to 0. The upward trend is much harder to see. It's kind of there, but if you cover up a couple of the dots, it doesn't look as obvious. So that's your assignment, is look at your data, make the pivot table. You can look at, is your maximum temperature changing up or down? Is your minimum temperature changing up or down? Is your total precipitation changing up or down? So just pick, like a month or a year or 1 or 2 of those variables and just put it together and say, what does it look like? The trend is like, is there any change? There won't necessarily be one. The Earth is a big place and the weather is complicated. But the idea is to play around with your data and figure out if there is. And then we're going to talk about testing a hypothesis, using data to say, is something happening or not in the next video.